Content warning. One of the stories in the following review is titled The Schizoid Man. Schizoid is a now defunct term for a mental illness. Thanks to advances in scientific understanding, it is obsolete and no longer applicable. Unfortunately, as such, it has since become a slur against the mentally ill. In both the original TV series and the Big Finish remake of The Prisoner, it is abundantly clear that the word is not being used in that context. But I personally feel it would be nothing short of ignorant not to acknowledge this issue. Please be warned as well that as it is used in the title of one of these stories, I will be saying this word. I wish to extend my apologies to those whom it makes uncomfortable, and I completely understand if you do not wish to progress further with this video. And spoilers for the TV version of The Prisoner. Hey guys, how's everyone doing? This is Sir Jedi Sentinel, and welcome back to Sentinel Reviews. I didn't expect to be doing this so soon after I finished my David Warner series. In fact, I was expecting to take a little bit of a break, nothing too long, maybe just a week or two. In fact, I wanted my next review to be the second half of Big Finish's celebration of the 40th anniversary of the Sixth Doctor, The Trials of a Time Lord. But after listening to this, I decided, I think I want to review this. So for the next 3 weeks, we will be looking at Big Finish's adaptation/remake of The Prisoner. Today, we are looking at Volume 1, released in January of 2016, written and directed by Nicholas Briggs. The Prisoner stars Mark Elstob as number 6. Also featured in Volume 1 are John Standing, Celia Imrie, Ramon Tikaram, and Michael Cochran. As always, because I do these unscripted, there is a blanket spoiler warning in place. So if you do not wish to be spoiled for the stories in question, in the description box below is the link to Big Finish's website where you can purchase The Prisoner Volume 1. This set consists of 4 stories, 3 of which are remakes of episodes of the show, and 1 which is an original story. So we have Departure and Arrival, which is a remake of the episode Arrival. The second story is The Schizoid Man, a remake of the episode of the same name. The third story is Your Beautiful Village, the original story in this set. And the fourth story is The Chimes of Big Ben, once again a remake of the episode of the same name. If I were to rank these stories for me from my least favorite to my favorite, at the bottom, number 4, the weakest story of the set would be The Chimes of Big Ben. It's the one with the least deviations and trying to find its own identity. It is the most direct one-to-one adaptation, which is a little bit disappointing. Number 3 would be Departure and Arrival. Most of my overall thoughts on this set in regards to its flaws are present or most prevalent in this story. Number 2 would be The Schizoid Man. Just a solid remake of one of my favorite episodes of the show and done really well on audio. And my favorite story in this set is Your Beautiful Village, which uses the audio medium to its fullest. This is not a story you could tell visually. So before we go any further into my review, what is The Prisoner? I should give you a rundown just in case you've never seen the series before, either the original series or listened to this audio drama remake. Just don't watch the AMC remake. It's absolutely terrible. Just a quick rundown on that. In the late 2000s, I think, I don't remember, the TV network AMC made a remake of The Prisoner, starring religious right-wing nutjob Jim Caviezel as number 6 and Ian McKellen as number 2. It was not good. So anyway, what is The Prisoner? The Prisoner focuses on a man who we are going to call number 6, more on that in a moment, and in the opening title sequence, not the opening credits, but the title sequence, we see him go into his place of work and resign. Now, we don't know what number 6's job was. It is heavily implied he was some sort of secret agent or spy, There's even additional headcanons we're not going to get into here. But regardless, he goes into his place of business and suddenly decides he's resigning. On his way home, he is suddenly abducted. When he wakes up, he is in a mysterious location known only as the Village. And it becomes very quickly clear that the Village is a prison of some sort. One of the things that the Village is doing is that no personal identities, no sort of individuality, which is why no one is ever addressed by their names. They are only addressed by numbers. Number 6, whose name we never learn, is only given a badge with the number 6 on it and is referred to for the remainder of the series as number 6. His main antagonist is the head of the Village, known as Number 2. And Number 2 is a very precarious position because in almost every episode of The Prisoner, Number 2 is a different person. But regardless of the schemes, the methods, the approach, the objective is always the same. The Village wants to know why Number 6 resigned. And Number 6 similarly has his own goals. He wants to keep his mind intact and not divulge his secrets. He wants to escape the village, find its location, and destroy it. And he wants to find the person running it all, the mysterious Number 1. The Prisoner is a show that is just steeped in surrealism and 60s psychedelia. If something doesn't make sense logically or realistically or physically as in pertains to the laws of physics, there is probably something symbolically or allegorically going on. Also, just as I hope I made clear, if you're looking for a show with answers, as it seems like a lot of modern audiences are nowadays, you are not going to like The Prisoner. The Prisoner revels in its ambiguity. You know, it was a miniseries of 17 episodes. It wasn't canceled or anything. It completed its run. In fact, the creator, producer, and star of the series, Patrick McGoohan, who played Number 6, wanted it to be a shorter run of like 7 episodes or something, but it was made 17 for international distribution. But anyway, by the end of the series, your questions will not be answered. But it's not a case of being unresolved, it's a case of being ambiguous. Why did Number 6 resign? You will never find that out. What does the Village want? No, that's the big one. When is the series set? It's heavily implied the series is set during the Cold War, but again, you will never figure that out. Who is running the Village? You know, the various Number 2s tell Number 6 who is running the Village, but because obviously they are Number 6's jailers, there is a question of whether or not their intel is true. So, of course, you will never figure that out. Where is it? You see what I'm getting at? The Prisoner is steeped in not just symbolism and allegory, but ambiguity. So your mind has to make up answers that are satisfactory. And like I said, to a lot of modern day audiences who demand everything be explained and spoon-fed to them, you are not going to like this show. But if you can look past that and accept that there are answers you are not going to get, I think you're going to have a good time. Which brings me to, again, Big Finish's remake of it. Because some of their IPs are continuations of the show, like Doctor Who and Dark Shadows and Sapphire and Steel. Some of their IPs are remakes of those original shows, like The Prisoner, like Space 1999, like Adam Adamant Lives. I am almost hesitant to recommend Big Finish's Prisoner on its own. Not because it's good, but because even though it is a remake, because of the surrealism, I feel like you need the context of the original series to understand what's going on here. But that is just me seeing. I had already watched the original series before listening to Big Finish's interpretation of it. So I would love if someone had never seen the original series to listen to this and tell me what they think. Also, I should put in a fair warning now. This review may be a little bit longer than some of my past reviews because, in regards to The Prisoner, there is a lot of ground to cover. As for the overall quality of the set itself, it's good. It's really good. I don't know how high I would rank it, honestly, though, because my mind kept comparing it to the original series. So it's just more of a, the original series zigged where the Big Finish remake zags. And because I kept thinking in those comparisons, I oftentimes had trouble looking at the Big Finish version on its own merits. Not to say it's bad. Like I said, I did enjoy it. And there are some interesting ideas here. And the ideas might be what make or break you, especially, again, compared to what if you've seen the original series or not. And like I said, that's where some of my critiques lie, as an example, just compared to how Big Finish did this versus how the original series did that. As one example, there is a major side character named Number 9. Number 9 is another prisoner of the village, played by Sarah Powell here. She's sort of a composite character of the one-off female characters who sort of popped up through various episodes of The Prisoner, because apparently, and anything you hear about the behind the scenes of The Prisoner, you have to take with a grain of salt because it all comes from third-party sources. After the series concluded, Patrick McGoohan was notoriously tight-lipped about it. He did not want to talk about The Prisoner anymore after it concluded. The point I was getting to is apparently the studio mandated that they wanted The Prisoner to have a female lead, but it was something McGoohan fought against. Yeah, there would be female characters in the show. He'd be fine with that. But he didn't want a romantic lead. So as these stories play out, Number 9 is kind of a composite character of the various female characters in those episodes. But it's also trying to make her kind of a lead. And it's one of those cases where I don't know how I feel about that. Maybe if I had listened to the Big Finish version on its own, I might be a little bit more okay with it. But just again, knowing the original series and knowing what it did and presumably knowing why it did that, again, take any behind the scenes information about this show with a grain of salt, I don't entirely know if I like this idea. As far as the remakes go, a lot of what's being portrayed here just seems to be updates, like more contemporary updates. Like, again, as I said, The Prisoner is presumably set during the Cold War. In fact, a couple of episodes make mention of the Iron Curtain. But while it's never explicitly said where it's set, the village is clearly run on and powered by anachronistic technology. And this audio even goes one step further in making it seem more futuristic, which I think is kind of cool. So like there were these funky in the TV show, there were these funky looking phones, or there were these giant view screens that the various people running the village could look at. They had ways of tracking everyone. There was Rover, which, even if you've never seen The Prisoner, through pop culture osmosis, I assume you are familiar with Rover. And the Big Finish version just kind of goes one step further in doing that. So like in Big Finish's version, the village has tablets and it has touchscreen technology. And those are the big ones I remember. It has holographic projectors. They have the capabilities of cloning people. And I will admit this is one of my issues too, particularly with that first story, Departure and Arrival. The exposition around it is very clunky. Because, a lot of it is just Number 6 going, what is this? How are you doing that? What is that? And having the information explained to him. I feel like there was a more smooth way it could have done, because as I just said, the exposition in how it's established is a little clunky. I do think the atmosphere isn't quite there either. It's here and there in some places because The Prisoner was a very visual show. And it is very obvious that Nicholas Briggs is trying to find a way to translate the visual surrealism of the show into audio. And I don't think he quite does it well enough here. At the time of recording this, I have already listened to Volume 2, and he does it there much better. I think he's struggling to toe that line between making it surreal and still having it make a modicum of sense, or at the very least, still being able to follow it. This is in the reason why Your Beautiful Village is my favorite, because he really does a good job of translating that surrealism into the audio format. He does it best there. In fact, I will say overall, I think The Prisoner, again, just having the context of having heard both volumes 1 and 2, I have not heard volume 3 yet. I think The Prisoner is some of Nicholas Briggs' best scripts. Like, in the circles I run around in the Big Finish fan circles I run around in, Nicholas Briggs is very polarizing as a writer. Most people I've seen don't really like his output. I'm a little more mixed because he has put out some really terrific stories, like he did Unit Dominion, which he co-wrote. He did Creatures of Beauty, which many people say is one of the Fifth Doctor's best audios. He did Beneath the Viscoid from the War Master Series 1, one of my personal favorites. And he did Only the Monstrous, the entire first volume of John Hurt's War Doctor series. And that was terrific. But then on the other side, he has done stories that aren't well regarded as well. For example, just right off the top of my head, there was a 10th Doctor epic called Dalek Universe, and he wrote sort of a prologue story with the 4th Doctor called Genetics of the Daleks, and that story was very poorly received. In fact, there was a bit of controversy because Nicholas Briggs did not take its poor reception very well. And there was also, he wrote a 3rd Doctor Dalek story as well. I don't remember what it was called. There were 2 3rd Doctor stories, one in the 3rd Doctor Adventures Volume 3 and one in the 3rd Doctor Adventures Volume 6. He wrote the Volume 3 one, and that Dalek story is one of the primary reasons why the 3rd Doctor Adventures Volume 3 is considered the worst volume in the 3rd Doctor Adventures range. But beyond those outliers, his stuff has mostly just been very in the middle. Ravagers was okay, but meh, the first 9th Doctor series. But yeah, I will say, just, for all of our thoughts on Nicholas Briggs, specifically in this case as a writer, The Prisoner is some of the best scripts he has ever written. I will just say that. That is my own personal opinion. The other big issue I have with the story, at least right now, is Mark Elstob as number 6. Because I think he's trying too hard right now. He is trying too hard to emulate Patrick McGoohan, who, again, created the show and played number 6 in the original series. In fact, in his first scenes in that first story, Departure and Arrival, Elstob is deepening his voice. He is making it deeper. Like, it almost sounds like he's trying to do a McGoohan impression. And it comes off as needlessly cruel. Now, I get where he's coming from. I'll talk about that in a second. And as the series goes on, he finds a much better balance of making the role his own, emulating what Patrick McGoohan did, and still coming off as kind of dickish. Because Patrick, to me, this is just my personal opinion, Patrick McGoohan as number 6 in The Prisoner is the gold standard in how you do an unlikable protagonist. Because if you look at the way he goes about things, not just his plans to escape the village or some of the methods he comes up with, but the way he interacts with other people, number 6 is a dick. He is a massive asshole. I try not to be so colorful in my reviews here, but there is just no way to do it. And like I said, that's by design in a lot of ways, because in the village, he doesn't know which villagers are prisoners and which villagers are wardens. He can't trust anyone except himself. And, often what he does in his interactions with other people are him fighting against the village in any way we can. Like, we don't like number 6 for what he does, but we also understand what he's fighting against. And it's just, like I said, he is the gold standard. The prisoner is the gold standard in how you do an unlikable protagonist. You don't have to sympathize with him. You don't have to agree with him. But it's a good idea to help sympathize with his cause, with, understand what he's fighting against. And I think in doing that, especially in some of those early stories, Elstop comes off as too mean. Like, in trying to emulate Patrick McGoohan, they go a little too far and make him too cruel. Like, there are some things number 6 in this set does that I don't think Patrick McGoohan in the original series would have done. So now let's kind of break down the stories a little bit. So our first story, Departure and Arrival, which again is a remake of the first episode of the series, Arrival. We are shown number 6, or as we know him by his sort of agent number before he's imprisoned, ZM73, that is from the series as well. We start to see him going on his last mission. And I get why this scene exists, because the opening premise of the series, number 6 resigning and being imprisoned in the village, all of that is done in the opening title and opening credit sequences, and it's done non-verbally. So this scene exists because obviously you can't do that non-verbally on audio, unless you were doing like an audiobook or linking narration. So Briggs had to find a way to show that opening happening just to show that opening happening to set the events of the series in motion. There is also something interesting here that I think is Nicholas Briggs's headcanon. I don't know. I think I've also seen it that it is a headcanon of some people in the of some prisoner fans as well. And for this, I need to sort of majorly spoil an episode of the show. So, in the TV series The Prisoner, there is an episode called Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling. And I think this episode purely exists just so Patrick McGoohan could use vacation time. But anyway, in the series, we learn that the village is looking for a doctor named Professor Seltzman. Seltzman has come up with some sort of body swapping technology, and the village only knows how to partially do the process. The problem is, Seltzman has disappeared. The last person to see him before his disappearance was number 6. So what the village does is they swap number 6's mind into another agent's body. So, again, Patrick McGoohan could use some vacation time. And they send him out into the real world to find Professor Seltzman, holding his body hostage as insurance so that they could get Seltzman's knowledge to complete the body swapping process. Now, there is a headcanon in among prisoner fans that this last mission where number 6 saw Professor Seltzman before he disappeared, this ties into why number 6 resigned. I don't know if I agree or disagree with that, just because it is very obvious watching the show that why number 6 resigned ultimately does not matter. It is a moot point. In fact, I would go so far to say my own interpretation is that the village always wanted to imprison number 6. And his resignation is just the perfect excuse to do it. But it seems to me like... Goodness, excuse me. But it seems to me like the Seltzman stuff again is kind of tied into the reason why number 6 resigned, at least in Big Finish's remake, because again, having listened to volume 2, Seltzman gets brought up again, and while I haven't listened to it yet, in volume 3 there is a story called the Seltzman connection. So it seems like it is much more strongly implied that that is the case. Which brings me to another thing. The Big Finish version has a much stronger narrative through line than the TV show did, because again, ambiguous. The Prisoner very famously has a messed up episode order. In its original airing on TV, the first episode was aired correctly, and the last 2 episodes were aired correctly. The remaining episodes in the middle were all aired out of order. And there have been debates about this for years, about what the proper episode order is. And every time it's been released and re-released on VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, the episode order is always rearranged because, again, Patrick McGoohan never revealed what the proper episode order is. But the show is so surreal and psychedelic that, except for the first episode and the last 2, the episode order really doesn't matter. And it's one of the great things about the show, just playing into that ambiguity and that surrealism. So it is a little disappointing that there is a much stronger narrative through line. You know, for example, Departure and Arrival ends with number 6 thinking he has stolen a helicopter and escaping the village. Then the next episode, The Schizoid Man, begins with the village activating the helicopter's remote control and bringing number 6 back. Also, just while we're on this, with this narrative through line, Your Beautiful Village ends with number 6 being taken to the hospital, and The Chimes of Big Ben, the final story of the set, starts with him waking up in the hospital and leaving. Again, it's just not something because I'm comparing it to the series and not judging it on its own merits, it's not something I'm entirely sure how I feel about, is all. You know, like, again, I get it just because Briggs is really trying to toe that line again between in translating the surrealism of the show onto audio and still trying to make sure listeners can follow along with the show at all. So that brings us to number 2. Again, the head of the village and the main antagonist of the series, pretty much. In this first episode, number 2 is played for the majority of it by John Stanning, and I really like his energy. He seems kind of impish almost, you know, because again, in Arrival, number 6 waking up and exploring his surroundings, learning he's in the village, that's all done non-verbally. So Big Finish works around that by having number 2 watch him interact with his surroundings and sort of commentate on it. And he's having a blast. He's just enjoying it. Like I said, he's very impish. And then he meets number 6 himself, and he is kind of doing what Guy Dolman, who played number 2 in that episode, did. He's kind of being charming about it. He's trying to sell the village to number 6. It's like, you know, once you tell us what you know, you can't leave the village, but we can make this a paradise for you. And then when the third act begins, of course, he is replaced by Celia Imrie. And Celia Imrie is much more cruel about it. She is much more sadistic. She's going, okay, that was us being nice. We're done being nice now. And again, with the sense of that narrative through line, Celia Imrie is the number 2 for the Schizoid Man. Now, the Schizoid Man is kind of a fascinating episode because it's one of those times where number 2 is trying to break number 6's mind pretty bluntly to get him to confess. So what number 2 does is they manage to trick, through some very traumatizing conditioning, they manage to trick number 6 into thinking he is another member of the village called number 12. And he is being tasked with a mission to impersonate number 6 because the real number 6 because the real number 12 is pretending to be number 6 as part of number two's plan, to try and break him. Whereas the real plan is trying to get number 6 to doubt his reality. Even though Elstob still kind of trips over the line to being too mean and too cruel as number 6, this is a performance. I really like his performance in The Schizoid Man because he is playing both number 6 and number 12. And, just thanks to the audio medium and not being able to see the actors, it ends up working really well because when number 6 and number 12 interact with each other, that you have no idea who is who until sort of the climax when they have their final confrontation. Also, something interesting to note here, I kind of talked about it in my overview for this review. In the original episode, The Schizoid Man, when number 6 finally gets the upper hand and tricks Rover into killing number 12, okay, that was not where I wanted to go with that. But it's ultimately revealed by the end of the episode, number 12 was just a lookalike who looked a lot like number 6. And it's what allowed them to pull off this scheme. In Big Finish's version, just again, one of those contemporary updates, number 12 is a clone made by the Village. And again, like I just said, that's one of those updates. There is another one I'll talk a little bit more about in Volume 2. There is a character played by Helen Goldwyn. She shows up as like the taxi driver for the Village. She is the voice of the Village announcements. She is sort of the interface on the Village touchscreens and computers. She is the controller who sort of oversees the Village for number 2 and calls them if anything's wrong. And they are all strongly implied to be clones of each other. Again, that is a plot point that will come much more into play in number 2. But that brings us to my favorite story in the set, Your Beautiful Village. After basically these two ordeals in Departure and Arrival and The Schizoid Man, number 6 wakes up in total blackness. He can't even see his hand in front of his face. He can't hear anything at all. He can't even feel anything. All he can find is the phone. And all he can seem to contact is number 2, who this time is played by Ramon Tikaram, or number 9. And he can barely do that. I want to stop right there. In this set, Ramon Tikaram is my favorite number 2. He's just really good at playing the, nice man on the outside, hiding a darker intent on the inside. And when that darker intent starts coming out, it's a little intense. But Ramon Tikaram is just one of my favorite actors. In fact, he is my fan cast for the Doctor. So I just like him in general. But it's clear something is wrong with the Village. All systems seem to be down, and number 2 believes number 6 is the only person capable of restoring power to the Village and getting its systems up and running. So they're kind of forced to work together. Or are they? Because this is this number 2's plan. He is subjecting number 6 to a sensory deprivation torture. Throughout the first 2 stories in this set, everyone kept telling number 6 what a beautiful village it was. And he had kind of committed the layout of the village to a photographic memory of sorts. Like, he is telling number 9 he knows that he's coming to find her and he knows the directions to her house. So, through this type of torture, they are trying to get him to appreciate the village, at which point number 2 says, what if I were to make it go away again? And that's where Tikaram really flips the switch into that darker, intent, and it's so good. I just love this story. Like I said, this is really where Briggs starts to find a good sort of balance with the surrealism, and it uses the audio medium to its fullest. You cannot do this story visually. Over the course of the series, number 9 is ultimately killed by Rover for trying to save number 6 from number 2. And that leads us to the final story, The Chimes of Big Ben. Like I said, this one was disappointing because it is the most direct one-to-one adaptation of the episode of its name. Like, unlike The Schizoid Man and Departure and Arrival, it doesn't take as many liberties with that story. There are still some, to be sure, but it's just not as, it's much truer to the episode. Our number 2 in this story is Michael Cochran, who seems to really be channeling Leo McKern and how he played number 2 in this role. You know, just very boisterous, let's say. He's always guffawing at everything. It seems like he's just happy-go-lucky, but get on his bad side and he will turn in an instant. Like, he's, you know, in one of his early scenes, he's in a diner with number 6, and the waitress drops and breaks a teacup. And she starts, you know, cleaning it up, as she does. And finally, he snaps at her and goes, "Oh, just get out of here already." Things like that. Like, he turns on an instant. There are some similarities with John Standing and Celia Imrie and their number 2s. Because, again, Ramon Tikaram is in an original story. But, again, it's so easy to compare Michael Cochran to Leo McKern. And, you know, then a new prisoner arrives in the village, a woman named Nadia, who seems to be from the other side of the Iron Curtain. In fact, she is Lithuanian. She seems to know what the village is and where it is, so her and number 6 come up with a plan to escape the village with her knowledge, get back to London, and report what they found. But it's quickly found this is a ploy, again, by the village, and one of the attempts to demoralize number 6 and show he can never escape. Because, and again, this is one of the deviations, in the original episode, they stage it to look like he's in London. Like, clearly one of his superiors or someone in his former place of work is working with the village. And, you know, that once he leaves that office, he finds it was sort of a studio or a stage or something, and he walks out into the village, and he learns that Nadia was in on it. Here, it's holographic projectors. And, you know, once he calls the bluff, he finds he is still in the village. And then there is something interesting done here that's only done as, you know, that sort of cliffhanger reveal that because of the surrealism of the prisoner is never going to be followed up. In Big Finish's version, Nadia becomes number 2. And again, this is something that will not be followed on in Volume 2. I don't know if it'll come up again in Volume 3, but it's not coming up in Volume 2. Yeah, The Prisoner, again, is a very solid start to Big Finish's version of this iconic series. Like I said, it's having seen the original show and listening to Big Finish's version, it's interesting to note the similarities and the differences and seeing what the Big Finish version is doing. Like I said, it has some of Nicholas Briggs's best writing, and the performances are mostly solid. All 4 of our number 2s are spectacular, especially Ramon Tikaram and Michael Cochran. And, you know, Sarah Powell, is also really good as number 9, even if I don't particularly like that character's existence. Just, again, most of my issues are in comparing this to the original series. But those are just my thoughts. Oh, I have a feeling this was a long one. Have you listened to The Prisoner yet? What are your thoughts on Volume 1 for right now? Please start a conversation in the comments below. And remember to like, comment, subscribe. Click the bell next to subscribe to get notifications when I upload. And in the description box below, you'll find the link to my socials, where you can follow me and get updates on the channel. This is Sir Jedi Sentinel, and I'll see you guys next week when we look at Volume 2.